Greetings and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing Asi Wind's Masterclass Live lecture series. Now this was a new lecture series that was put out by Vanishing Magic this past month, consisting of 3 main lectures about an hour long, followed by 30 minutes of questions and answers. This was videotaped in front of a live audience through video chat, and it was hosted by Joshua J. and Andy Gladwin. Now, if you guys are familiar with my last review I did on Asi Wind's work, it was his book Repertoire. I am pretty much a fan, especially after studying his work for almost a year, performing half of the routines in this book. I'm very familiar with his work overall. If you did watch him on Penn and Teller's Fool Us, then obviously you know the type of magic that he performs, and he's extremely well known for his memorized deck magic, so I had really high expectations here. If you go to Vanishing Magic, you'll see that all of the reviews on this lecture series are all 5 out of 5. Especially with a name like Masterclass Live, you're expecting to get something incredible. Overall, unfortunately, I was really disappointed, and as you guys know, I always tell you how it is, so I'm going to tell you really my real thoughts on this, and I was really disappointed with it. I felt like that it could have been a lot better. So I felt that Asi Wind really rushed through these lectures. I felt that he didn't spend enough time going over any individual piece. Oftentimes explanations would be cut short so he could continue. I felt like the material he chose was really a hodgepodge of things. There didn't feel like there was any real cohesive theme to this lecture series overall. And my biggest complaint really is that there was a lack of original content. I mean, you would be expecting to get all kinds of stuff on memorized deck magic and whatnot, and he just barely scratched the surface of that. And really what you're gonna find here is he's gonna teach you a bunch of effects of other magicians. I mean, he's gonna teach you effects from Ed Marlowe, from Danny D'Ortiz. He's gonna be going over Tommy Wonder routine. I mean, this is not his magic. This is other people's magic that he's teaching you. And overall, I just felt like you could be watching a lecture from anybody. It didn't feel like an Asi Wind lecture. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are not gonna like to hear this, but I have to tell you how it is. Now, I'm gonna just stick to the 3 main lectures for this review, and I'm just gonna touch on the highlights and basically just answer those questions you probably have, really to help you make a real educated decision whether or not you really wanna pick this up and invest in it. I mean, price tag wise, this isn't cheap. $75 if you wanna pick up this lecture series, or you can make a 3-month commitment and pay $50 a month. Although you may want to think twice after you hear what I have to tell you about this. So the first week, the first lecture kicks off with a utility item he calls a fan force. Now it's an interesting idea, although I felt like the practicality of in real life, it's probably not that practical. He fans a deck out, has a spectator think of a card that they see, and then you can go from there. The problem is that they may not think of the card you want them to think of. So it almost feels like a classic force from a fan. Personally, I was thinking, well, why not just have them peek a card? You know, I just felt like it's just as good and probably even more reliable. So that's another utility item that you probably aren't going to really use too much, although that's the first thing he teaches you. Then after that, he goes into a double-digit force, which I felt a lot of people are probably gonna just skip over. The idea of it seems clever, but when I watched it in his own hands, it looks transparent. He flashes a deck of cards and asks a spectator to think of any 2 numbers from any 2 cards that they see there. He has some clever ideas around it, but I think that the application of it is just really not practical. He introduces the idea that you can use it for a book test. It doesn't make sense that you're gonna take out a deck of cards and do this and then take out a book to do a book test. It just doesn't fit together. He also goes over the idea that you can use the 2-digit force to do a magic square, which again, it just feels really weird that you're gonna take out a deck of cards just to have somebody think of a 2-digit number. There's so many other better ways to either force a 2-digit number or just let them think of their own 2-digit number. You guys may remember that I did do various reviews where I did mention Ben Blau's Pocket Square, and that's something you may want to check out if you are looking for a magic square type of effect. I don't think that many people are going to use this double-digit force idea that he gives you here, so I just tell that to you. Following that, he introduces something he calls the XY deck, which is really an idea from Barry Richardson. So if you have Barry Richardson's Act 2 book, then you can learn the XY deck, you can learn how to make it up there. And Asi Wind doesn't really give you any new applications to it here. He does demo how to use it, so some people may like that, but overall it's just something that you may or may not use. It just felt like it was another item that was just thrown in here. And in terms of routines that he goes over during the first week, he briefly just describes a routine from Chan Canasta, which it's a 2-card thought of card routine. It's a 2-card routine where they take 2 cards and put them in their pockets, and then he tells them what they are. You can actually learn the routine from David Britland's book, A Remarkable Man. So, you know, there's nothing new there. He finally does go over a routine of his own, and that comes from repertoire, and that routine is called reverse engineering. Now, if you remember from my review on that, the basic premise was a spectator thinks of a card, they take the deck under the table, they reverse a card, they cut the deck a couple times, they bring it out, you spread the cards, and the only reverse card is their thought of card. Now, unfortunately, that requires a completely gimmicked deck, and it requires arts and crafts. So I think a lot of people aren't going to use that. If you remember during my review, I did mention Mark Calabrese's effect Red Medicine, and you probably want to take a look at that instead, because it's the same exact effect, but with an ungimmicked, impromptu borrowed deck. So I'm really surprised that he chose that effect out of repertoire. There's so many other good routines in here, but he decided to go over that routine. That's the only routine he goes over in the book, and I was surprised that he didn't add anything extra to it. I was expecting he would at least teach you something new, some kind of added thing to it, but you're not going to get anything else out of that. So that's pretty much the first week. At the end of this review, I'm going to touch just briefly on the question and answer segments, but I'm just going to leave that for the end. The second week kicks off with him teaching Tommy Wonder's Tamed Card. Now, Tommy Wonder's Tamed Card is perfectly fine the way it is. Here he gives you a couple of little nuances and ideas. Does he really introduce anything earth-shattering? No. Are you going to learn anything here that's so much different than if you learned Tommy Wonder's effect? No. In fact, if you are interested in learning a more streamlined version of Tommy Wonder's Tamed Card, you should probably just check out Dan Harlan's version that he put out last month with Penguin Magic. I mean, here the mechanics are all the same as the way that Tommy Wonder did it. So there's not really anything new here. And I kind of wondered, why is Asi Wind teaching somebody else's card magic? Like, this is supposed to be his masterclass. Why isn't he teaching his own original magic? I mean, I just couldn't get over that overall. He follows that up by going into an explanation of Chan Canasta's book test. Now, I'm really shocked by that. I can understand that he was highly influenced by Chan Canasta, but why are you going to try to explain Chan Canasta's book test, which those people that are interested can just pick up David Britland's book. The reason why Chan Canasta's book test was so impressive was because Chan Canasta had a photographic memory. He could look at a page of text and memorize half of the text almost instantly. Now, most of us can't do that. And so most of us are not going to be able to perform Chan Canasta's book test the way he used to. Several of the techniques here that Asi Wind teaches you are well known to those of us that perform a lot of mentalism and perform a lot of book tests. So I don't think that you're going to get a whole lot out of this. And again, like I was going to mention, like this is again him teaching someone else's magic. You can see like there's this running theme of that. He does teach an imaginary card under watch routine. It's an okay routine. You may like it. Of course, he doesn't really demo it because he doesn't have a spectator there. The actual utility item that he uses to do that, I don't really like it because I think it's limiting. I think if you're going to be using that utility item, you should go with one of the other ones that exist on the market. But that's just my own opinion. Finally, he goes into an idea with the memorized deck where he teaches, or he goes over an idea of how you could do like a memory routine with a memorized deck. Unfortunately, his two main ways of teaching that, really, I found them both just not to be very good, because first he does a false shuffle and then tells you, oh, I can't teach you it. So he's like, well, you know, there's two ways you can get into this. You can use the XY deck, so you're gonna have to have a fully gimmicked deck to do this, or, you know, you can go into this starting with a false shuffle, but I can't teach you the false shuffle, so that kind of leaves you high and dry. He doesn't really give you a lot of presentation for it overall, and I would actually recommend, if you are interested in doing a memory type routine where you're calling out cards from a memorized deck, I would recommend you check out Adrian Guerra's project, which was called Euphoria. Because in that project, he starts with a regular deck, the deck shuffled by the spectators multiple times. He does a routine that gets him back into the stack, which then afterwards he goes into the memory routine, and it looks incredible because you're using a deck of cards that was totally shuffled. So what Asi Wind is teaching you here, it really isn't anything groundbreaking, and I feel that you're really not going to get a lot out of that. And it really was a disappointment because this was really the only piece that he goes over that has to do with the memorized deck. So if you're looking for a lot of memorized deck work here, you're not going to find it on this lecture series overall. He does also spend about 30 minutes talking about pre-show. Even though he does give you an interesting story from his own personal life, I mean, 30 minutes talking about pre-show is just a lot of time. A lot of what you're going to hear are things you already know. That's pretty much what you can expect from the second lecture. And then finally, the third lecture kicks off with him going over a routine by Danny D'Ortiz called Twin Souls, which, if you remember, he put that out on his DVD Que Raro with Christian Engblom. And I don't think he added anything really groundbreaking to that either. I think if you're interested in Twin Souls, you should just learn from Danny D'Ortiz. I think he did it fine on Que Raro. In fact, you'll also see the anti-pharaoh on there and the cascade control. So here, Asi Wind is trying to teach you Danny D'Ortiz's routine, which works perfectly fine already the way it is. He didn't have to teach somebody else's card routine again. I mean, I'm just kind of wondering why he's doing that each time, but this is what he decided to do. I think it's because he published in a new book, I think it was called Paperwork, he published a couple of variations of these routines, so that's why he decided to teach this stuff here. Unfortunately, I think he should have really taught you more newer material, stuff that you're not going to find in print, especially since you're paying $75 for this. He also goes over his own variation of an Ed Marlowe matching routine, which he calls Noah. And that's a routine which involves various spectators. If you're familiar with the Ed Marlowe routine, which you can find in Pharaoh-Controlled Miracles, Ed Marlowe's routine has 5 phases to it. Here, you're only going to have 2 phases, but it does look like an incredible routine because of the principles at play. Unfortunately, I really didn't like the idea of how spectators have to put the deck or half of the deck under the table and move cards. There's a lot of procedure involved. Honestly, I thought that Michael Close's version is just so much better. So if you're familiar with Michael Close's Devious DVD set, his second DVD he has on there, I think it's called the Matching Miracle, I think is what it was called. And that's a 2-phase matching routine which uses the exact same principle and ideas as here, although it's just a lot more streamlined and it's a lot easier to perform. You don't have to remember so much procedure. So I think that this version of Ed Marlowe's routine is not an improvement, unfortunately. So I think that a lot of people that are not familiar with other versions that exist out there, probably they're not going to know any better. But if you check out Michael Close's version, then and you compare them side by side, you're going to see what I'm talking about. And that's why you guys watch these reviews, so that way you can see that there are other versions out there that are similar and maybe better overall. Following that, he does throw out there this idea of a calculator trick, which I don't even know where he came up with that. I mean, it's not his idea. He just throws out there this idea of this calculator trick because he's trying to teach you some different ideas of things that you can perform over video chat. And it's a very simple idea that you can do, but again, it had no place in this lecture whatsoever. He just like another miscellaneous thing that he throws out there. He does also go over in like a out of your hands type of card force, which some people may like that. He briefly discusses his effect, which is called Gypsy Queen, but just tells you basically to just buy it. Unfortunately, Vanishing Ink doesn't even supply it right now. It's like out of stock. So even if you were interested in it, you can't even pick it up. That's pretty much what you can expect from the 3 lectures. In terms of the Q&A sessions at the end of them, unfortunately, I felt that Asi Wind's answers to those questions were really pretty lacking overall. And I'm just going to give you a couple of simple examples just to give you an idea of what you can expect there. The questions that were asked during the question and answer sessions are like those usual questions you always get. You know, the questions of, well, what do you do when you mess up? You know, what happens when this doesn't go as planned? People are always concerned about that. And here somebody asks him, well, if you're performing Chan-Canasta's test and it goes south, what are you going to do? He goes into a long dissertation giving examples and ideas of what he's done in the past. And then finally he just tells you, well, just watch Chan-Canasta. When he fails, you can see how he deals with it. So I thought that his answers to the questions were not really as good as you would expect. At one point, somebody asks him during one of the lectures, like, what are some basic tips you would give somebody who's just starting out in magic? And unfortunately, I thought his answer was horrible. I mean, he tells this person to expose themselves to as much magic as they can, to learn as much as possible, watch as many magicians as you can, read as many books as you can, this and that. And so I just thought, wow, that's really not a good thing. I mean, I'm no pro, but that's not what I would recommend somebody who's just starting out in magic. I would tell them, you know, pick one prop, learn a couple of sleights with that prop, learn 2 or 3 routines that use those sleights so you can practice them, then practice those 2 or 3 routines until you can do them with your eyes closed. Then when you have that confidence, go out and perform those 2 or 3 routines for as many people as you can. And then finally, you know, you will get a better taste of magic. You will actually become good at something, because if you try to learn a little bit of everything, then you're never going to get good at any one thing. So I was just really surprised that I thought that the answers to a lot of these questions they just left that taste in my mouth. Like, I was just wondering, like, really? So overall, I have to rate this lecture series as 2 out of 5. I thought it could have been a lot better. So if you're looking for some groundbreaking, amazing card magic, you're not gonna get it here. In fact, if any of these routines sound like things that you'd be interested in, I would recommend you just go to the source of them. Learn the routines from the original people that created them, because here there's really not a lot that's being offered. I mean, the small nuances are not worth the $75. I'm really surprised there isn't more realistic reviews that exist out there. Anyway, as always, if you guys have any questions or comments about this review or anything else I review, just leave me a comment below. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning into my reviews, and I'll see you on the next review.